What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, May 7th, 2021, end of the week. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And once again, YouTube has put a strike on my channel. This time I am banned for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be working with Rumble next week to get a new streaming setup done. It's not going to be free, and it's not even going to be cheap. But at this point, I'm really done with YouTube. I'm totally fed up with them. And I apologize for those who were dependent on the YouTube image to enjoy the show. But, you know, you can always go down to the post office and grab one of my wanted posters there. And that should take care of seeing my face. Today is the anniversary of the sinking of the Lusitania. And this was the... well, I guess you could call it a false flag or a hoax that got America, angered enough to join World War I. And there were 128 Americans that were on the Lusitania, which was a passenger ship. But the real issue is the Lusitania was also being used to smuggle weapons to Great Britain during World War I. And it was widely known. In fact, the German government actually took out ads in the American newspapers in New York warning people not to sail on the Lusitania because under the rules of engagement of the time, carrying weapons made it a legitimate target of war. And the Lusitania basically sailed into an area known to be crawling with U-boats. It's almost like they were inviting the sinking. The American media, as truthful back then as they are today, insisted the Lusitania was not carrying any weapons. It had been a horrific war crime by those gosh darn Germans. But when divers finally got inside the wreck of the Lusitania, they found it stuffed with American war materials. And so, yes, it had been a legitimate target of war. All right, we're going to do news until we run out of news, and then we're going to open up the phone lines for your comments and questions as we head into the weekend. All eyes are on the sky right now. China's new space station core is in orbit, but the booster that was used to put it up there, the Long March 5B, is in an unstable orbit. It is coming down. It's expected it's going to come down sometime tomorrow. They won't really know where it's going to land until a few hours before it does come down. Now, looking at the volume of water versus land on planet Earth, more than likely it's going to hit the ocean someplace. It doesn't always happen that way. When Skylab came down, it was predicted to hit the Pacific Ocean off the west coast of Australia, but some of it actually did make it onto land in Australia. Nobody was hurt or killed, and the people who wound up with that debris actually was a bit of a windfall because museums were buying that stuff to put on display. So, there are tons of debris falling out of orbit every year. There hasn't been a fatality yet, and hopefully that's going to continue. But right now, nobody really knows where that's going to come down, so we'll keep an eye on that. Getting on down to Maricopa County, we talked about this yesterday. Officials at Maricopa County are withholding materials subpoenaed by the state legislature as part of the audit of the county's 2020 election, claiming that surrendering them would constitute a security risk for both law enforcement and federal agencies. We're talking about the routers. We're talking about the hubs. And despite reassurances from the audit people, Maricopa County is defying the subpoena to turn over that hardware. And in a new development that happened earlier today, Dominion Voting Systems is also refusing to comply with the subpoena and turn over the administrator password to the Maricopa County machines. Now, the audit director, Ken Bennett, was on One American News, basically describing it as leasing a car but not being given the keys to it. and basically saying that the election was under the control of a corporation rather than the Maricopa County Election Board. And I'm not sure I believe this story about the password, but it's obvious they're trying to basically hide any place where evidence of deliberate fraud could be found. Now, this development is really very upsetting. This came out of charliekirk.com. Democrats apparently have succeeded in getting signature matching off the audit in Maricopa County. And Democrats have not had a lot of successes trying to stop this, but in a settlement that was involved with this lawsuit that was trying to stop the audit, they were able to get signature matching and verification to be taken out of the process. And again, they're trying to hide where the fraud took place if, in fact, the hand count of ballots does show that there was massive fraud. The United States Justice Department is worried about the Arizona vote recount, but again, under federal law, under the Constitution, they don't have any legal standing to actually get involved. But that hasn't stopped them from sending letters to the GOP Senate President Karen Fann, saying that they're concerned about federal law requiring ballots to remain in the control of elections officials for 22 months. And obviously, since they have been turned over to the auditors, they're no longer under the control of the election officials. It's a tiny, tiny point, but the Democrats are grasping at straws to try and prevent this from moving forward. And I don't think they realize how this looks to the American people, that they're working this hard to prevent an audit, because if, as they keep claiming, last November's election was totally honest and transparent and above board, what does an audit hurt? What does a recount hurt? It is clear they are hiding something. Down in Florida, they passed a new voting law passed on basically party lines. And already it's been hit with lawsuits just moments after it was signed into law by Governor Ron DeSantis. And they're claiming this law, Senate Bill 90, illegally restricts access to the ballot box, with one of the suits alleging the measure will result in illegal discrimination against voters of color. I don't know how they're getting there, but that's the claim that they are making. And, of course, this law is similar to the one that's over in Georgia, which is also coming under criticism from liberal Democrats. All right, looking forward to 2024, story coming on out of Blabberbuzz. Swing district voters who identify as Republicans and independents promote populist policies mirroring those promoted by former President Donald Trump, and are inclined to shun sharp-tongued insurgents, according to fresh polling. They're looking for pragmatic conservatives, but the polls are generally showing that these swing states are going to be very, very soft for Joe Biden come 2024. Of course, with the House Resolution 1 and Senate Bill 1 at the federal level, the vote fraud is going to continue. Unless that election fraud is somehow stopped, we are a one-party nation, just like the former Soviet Union. And over at the White House yesterday, they edited a transcript of Joe Biden's press conference to take out his suggestion that expressed support for Ukraine joining NATO. And this was done supposedly to avoid upsetting Russian President Putin, but it could fuel a perception that the Biden administration is fickle on Russia policy ahead of a summit next month between Biden and Putin. So they're already saying one thing, doing another. Story coming on out of Fox News, no less. Jem Psaki is admitting that Joe Biden taking impromptu reporter questions is not something they recommend. In other words, they want him to read the prepared statements and then leave and not take questions because he can't think on his feet. We had that embarrassment earlier in the week where he literally froze for a total of 8 seconds, unable to find words to speak. We have already been talking about Donald Trump's new website, donaldjtrump.com, and he had a Twitter account called From the Desk Of, which Twitter has already taken down. And as far as his website is concerned, it's already seeing big tech resistance. Well, welcome to my world there, Donald. And interestingly enough, even Elizabeth Warren is saying that Facebook's decision to uphold its ban on former President Donald Trump's account exhibits that big tech has way too much power and needs to be broken up. I certainly agree with that. It's time for some new blood, or in this case, new silicon. A little bit of good news for Donald Trump. The Federal Election Commission has dropped the inquiry into determining whether he violated campaign finance laws when his lawyer, Michael Cohen, paid Stormy Daniels $130,000 supposedly to stay quiet in the days leading up to the 2016 election. So that one is now over and done with. And let's see. So, people are already emailing me potential alternative streaming websites that I can look at, and I'm going to get into this next week because I've had it with YouTube. I absolutely have had it with YouTube. Claire's a new area, Claire's Corner. We're all over there on Brighteon, and I'm not putting anything up on YouTube ever again. Story coming on out of uns.com, and they're talking about current events here, and they're pointing out that conservatives are trying to euphemize the anti-white politics sweeping the nation. They're trying to pretend it's Marxism or ID politics, but it's this whole critical race project that is invading our schools and corporations to try and teach white people to be ashamed just of the fact that they have white skin. And the rationale that is coming out now is that the only way to make up for decades of racism against the blacks is to create decades of racism against the white. I don't think that's really a solution. Racism in any direction is wrong. And again, they're out there pushing this idea that they have to punish the white people for slavery, but not all white people were slave owners. There were actually black slave owners, and there were some white people very much opposed to slavery, including my family on my mother's side, who ran a station on the Underground Railroad. Up in Portland, the ruckus is continuing there. Black Lives Matter militants took to the streets yesterday in a march for Patrick Kimmons, who was shot by police all the way back in 2018 after a gang shootout on the streets late at night. And the Black Lives Matter militants on the streets of Portland were carrying AR-15s and AK-47s. They were pointing them at Portland motorists. There were no police visible anywhere around. Meanwhile, over in Kenosha, Wisconsin, they're still suffering from the damage caused by Black Lives Matter. And they're talking about this woman, Samantha Jacquist, who wanted to start an independent bookstore. And she thought it was going to be working there. And unfortunately, there was a shooting. Officer Rustin Chesky shot Jacob Black Jr., and the riots began there and are continuing. Story out of Responsible Statecraft, basically criticizing America's drug war as it has led to a bloodbath in Mexico, and that is also leaking across the border. And it's coming home to roost on our southern border. Decades of U.S. policy ineptitude have empowered Mexico's drug cartels to the point they pose an alarming threat to the country's basic social order, not unlike how the gangsters caused a lot of damage to the United States during Prohibition. And we certainly have seen a tremendous amount of drug money corruption among our present government structure. And it also talks about how the violence in Mexico is starting to go high tech. They're starting to use drones. The Jalisco cartel attacked police in Michoacan with explosive-laden drones, wounding 2 officers. So it's getting on out there. All right, let's talk about COVID-19. It's still out there, and of course, this is the topic that appears to have gotten me kicked off YouTube again because it was labeled medical misinformation. And I knew this was going to happen because I was not going to change my editorial policies to please YouTube. So, story coming on out of Health Impact News, a 16-year-old Wisconsin girl died following 2 doses of the experimental Pfizer vaccine. And this has been reported to the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. They actually had to do it twice because the first one, for some reason, didn't show up. So a little bit of technical difficulty there. There is a study out now that has found that the blood clot problem with the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine is far more common than has been reported. So using national health records, the researchers identified rates of arterial and venous events in a group of 282,000 people aged 18 to 65 years within 28 days of receiving a first dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine in Denmark and Norway, and compared those with expected rates in the general population of the same age and sex. The results showed 7 cases of the blood clotting in the vaccinated group. And they said if we monitored this number of people in this age range over 28 days, we would expect to see 0.3 cases of CVST. We found a rate 20 times higher than that, which translates to 1 excess case in every 40,000 people vaccinated. Interestingly enough, story coming on out of your destination now, doctors have discovered an alternative blood thinner that can safely dissolve blood clots linked to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's actually been used to save a Colorado woman's life. So doctors are out there working, trying to undo all this damage. Over in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio wants to offer Johnson & Johnson's 1-dose vaccine to tourists, even though less than half of New York City residents have had their first COVID-19 shot. And maybe it's his way of getting the tourist traffic back up again with the money that can be made therefrom. Over in New Jersey at Rowan University in Glassboro, they are offering up to a $1,000 financial incentive for students to get the COVID-19 vaccine. And full-time students who show proof of vaccination before August 7th will receive a $500 credit on their tuition and a $500 credit toward their housing bill. So they're, again, highly coercive. I mean, have you ever seen such an effort to push a vaccine on the public? Tucker Carlson, I imagine, is going to get kicked off of YouTube now. He came out with another video asking a very pointed question: how many Americans have died after taking the COVID vaccine? And he says, we're not talking about Americans who've been killed by the virus, but how many Americans have died after getting the vaccine to prevent the virus? And he says, it's time to talk about the potential risks, which is what we've been talking about that got me banned on YouTube. And, we talk about vaccines constantly, but the corporate media is still absolutely in lockstep with Big Pharma. It kind of makes me wonder if the top management of corporate media owns stock in the big pharmaceutical companies. Okay, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back for these few words. And welcome back to our show here. And again, we're talking about Tucker Carlson's latest video. And, the pressure to get the shot is enormous, and it's designed to get around both U.S. and law and the Nuremberg principles that experimental medical treatments cannot be given you without your informed consent. But look at the coercive tactics that are being used here. If you don't have the shot, you may not be able to fly on commercial airlines. You may not be able to get a job. You may not be able to send your children to school. The social pressure is absolutely enormous. It's very difficult not to be vaccinated in this country. And given that the shot doesn't seem to be that effective and has so many adverse effects, you have to wonder why. What is really going on? Okay, Moderna has announced that its COVID shot is 96% effective in teens aged 12 to 17 in early trials. But as it turns out, surveys are showing that just 29% of parents want their kids to receive the vaccine, any vaccine. So the doubts are definitely going out there. Interestingly enough, New York Times reported that Pfizer rescued Biden's campaign last year by shutting down its vaccine trial until the day after the election. But Biden's new support for waiving intellectual property protections on the vaccines has stabbed them in the back. And yes, it has. Now, Biden's rationale is to make the vaccine available to poorer countries who cannot afford the high prices being charged by these companies. Pfizer and Moderna's CEOs are speaking out and complaining as their shares plummet. Over in Great Britain, they're saying it is simply not fair on the companies that spent billions developing the vaccines, and says they probably just won't bother again. Well, as I recall, there was a lot of government money given to these companies to develop these vaccines. Over at MIT, they've had a new study that says social distancing and occupancy limits had absolutely no effect on slowing the spread of the Chinese virus through the past year. The only thing it did was help destroy the economy along with many innocent people's lives. So, another story, this one coming on out of Mercola. Health experts are now admitting that outdoor mask wearing is ridiculous. These health experts are weighing in. Among them is Lindsay Marr, a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Virginia Tech and an expert on viral transmission mechanics, who notes that brief outdoor encounters, such as walking past someone on a hiking trail, is a very low risk for transmission. And don't forget, we talked, I think it was last week, about that study out of Stanford that said the viral particle for COVID is 1,000 times smaller than the holes in the fabric of these masks that we're all buying and using and then throwing into the landfills. Oddly enough, Israel, which is fighting tooth and nail to get the International Criminal Court to ignore potential war crimes accusations regarding Palestine, they have now gone and filed a lawsuit at that same International Criminal Court demanding to stop mandatory COVID injections, and they are citing the Nuremberg Code violation as the rationale behind them. And this is one of the few things Israel is doing that I think is a really good idea, and I wish them a lot of luck. Story coming on out of Blacklisted News. The new proposal by the Biden administration to create a health-focused federal agency modeled after DARPA is not what it appears to be. It's essentially going to be a digital dictatorship controlling your medical treatment, not just for COVID, but for cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and you're no longer going to be in charge of your own medical care. They are treating us like livestock, no question. Okay, turning to the international news, Yesterday, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, said the U.S. is considering training the Afghan military in other countries outside Afghanistan after the U.S. troops are pulled out. He says there's a lot of different options out there, and they're looking at them. But the Afghan military, especially their Air Force, is reliant on Pentagon contractors to maintain their equipment. Austin said the plan is to eventually remove the U.S. contractors from Afghanistan, but Milley is suggesting that some sort of contractual support will continue. So we're not really leaving Afghanistan after all. All right, we're going to take another break here for some commercials, and we're going to be back here with a lot more news after these few words. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm looking at this interesting little story coming out of UNS.com, and it's pointing out there's been virtually no American corporate media coverage of last week's arrival of a senior Israeli delegation in Washington to discuss Iran. The delegation included the head of Israeli External Intelligence Service Mossad, Yossi Cohen, and Israel's National Security Advisor, Mir Ben-Shabbat. And they're basically saying in this article that we should be getting ready for a false flag to kick up a lovely new war somewhere in the Middle East. And I imagine it's probably going to focus on Iran. Israel wants war on Iran. They don't want a nuclear deal with Iran. They just absolutely want Iran broken up so it is not a threat to Israel. And Iran is not a threat to Israel in the military sense because Iran has not initiated a war of aggression against another nation in over 200 years. But Iran is a regional political power and economic power that Israel cannot compete with, and that is the real agenda behind pushing for a war. The Russian Navy has test-fired a supersonic anti-ship cruise missile in the Black Sea. This is considered to be a show of force ahead of NATO military exercises in the region. It's a P-1000 Vulcan missile. This is an improved version of the Soviet-era P-500 Basalt missile. It has a greater range. It was fired via the Moskva warship's Basalt main missile system, and it landed around 19 miles away. So they're getting on out there. Yesterday, we were talking about Israel was annoyed that Russian warships were now protecting Iranian oil tankers on their way to Syria, and Israel was throwing a tantrum about that. Well, in a follow-up YouTube video, Russia has also sent submarines armed with cruise missiles to protect the Iranian ships. So things are getting very, very tense there. Story out of antiwar.com. Israel attacked Syria again for the second night straight. Israel had gone nearly 2 weeks between attacking Syria and is now hitting it on a daily basis with an attack helicopter raid into the Golan Heights. It's still tough to determine exactly what happened. The Golan Heights are, of course, still a disputed area, with Syria saying it's their territory and Israel saying, no, we took it fair and square and it's ours now. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to reassure them of support for Ukraine's membership in NATO. This goes back to that little story we had about Biden mentioning this at a press conference, and then the transcript was edited to remove that because it might upset Vladimir Putin. But I'm certain that he's already aware of the bias in the United States regarding Ukraine's membership in NATO. Another story about NATO, a piece was published in Turkey's Hurriyet by its editor-in-chief, Sedat Ergin, asking if Biden is going to keep the U.S. nuclear weapons in Turkey at the Encirclet Air Base. Now, Erdogan has already declared those nuclear weapons are now the property of Turkey. It is estimated the Pentagon maintains 50 B-61 tactical nuclear weapons at the Incirlik Air Base in the country, along with an estimated 350 of those kept in Europe under the auspices of a NATO nuclear sharing or burden sharing arrangement. A lot of nuclear weapons floating around out there. The United States has responded to Iran's demand of the dropping of sanctions as a precursor to a renewed Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action treaty, saying that this is completely unrealistic. And the Biden administration is refusing to lift all of the sanctions. Now, when you go back to when the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was first negotiated, Iran agreed to abide by certain requirements regarding its nuclear enrichment, which they did. The United States agreed to lift certain sanctions, which they did not, and promptly added more sanctions on top of it. So it is, I think, quite reasonable for Iran to be focusing on those sanctions as Biden talks about reviving that deal. Interestingly enough, after all the years of animosity, it looks like Saudi Arabia and Iran might be getting back together, diplomatically speaking. And there was all this talk about Saudi Arabia being a target for Iran. And now they're backing off on that, and they're going for neighborly relations. So that is going to change the dynamics of the Middle East by quite a bit. Okay, Human Rights Watch is accusing Israel of casting its fate as apartheid with the nation-state law and dismissing the idea of a Palestinian state. They're calling it apartheid on steroids and saying that Israel is worse than apartheid South Africa back in 2008 before it started coming apart there. Last week, more stories about rampaging Israeli settlers screaming death to Arabs in Jerusalem. We were talking earlier in the week about how settlers were burning agricultural land belonging to the Palestinians, burning those olive trees. And that is a major, major hit because it takes 10 years after planting a new olive tree for it to bear a saleable, usable crop. And exporting olives is a big part of the Palestinian economy. Story coming on out from Information Clearinghouse saying that the behavior of the Israeli settlers is basically echoing the violence that surrounded Israel's establishment, because there was a lot of violence back then and just indiscriminate killing. There was the bombing of the King David Hotel, which even though they dressed up like Arabs, everybody knows that Israel did that. There's a video out right now, it's on BitChute, of the United States Army singing the Israeli national anthem, and I cannot tell you how sick that made me to hear that. All right. The European Union yesterday has authorized the United States, Canada, and Norway to participate in the Permanent Structural Cooperation Plan. It's called PESCO. This is a project that seeks to streamline the cross-border mobilization of troops and military equipment by land, sea, and air. Acceptance for participation was conditioned on the acceptance of several conditions, including the exchange of military information with the European Union. Everybody's picking sides. The U.S. military is going full speed ahead toward max LGBT inclusion. They are building these diversity panels. They're celebrating their first all-gay helicopter crew. And I think it's going to cause morale problems. I really, really do. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Wednesday the U.S. and its allies have to be very careful about Chinese investments in Western economies. Excuse me. They're saying that they have to be very careful what exactly is the nature of that investment. and they should be cautious if it's investing in a strategic industry or strategic assets. It has to be looked at very carefully that there isn't a technology transfer. Getting on to the economic news here, there is a story coming on out of Blacklisted News talking about the central bank digital currency. Now, yesterday we had a story about how it's going to be programmable. In other words, you won't be able to spend the currency on just anything you want. It can be programmed where you can spend it on certain goods and services and products, but not on others. That, I think, is very dangerous. But according to this article, they're saying that the central bank digital currency will be 100% trackable. And the government and the bank are going to know everything that you are doing with that currency, including when you stop off at the bakery on your way home and indulge in a jelly donut, which personally I don't think is anybody's business but me and the baker. Montana has canceled unemployment benefits in response to an unprecedented worker shortage. This is actually becoming a big problem. There has been so much stimulus out there and extended unemployment benefits. People are finding they can actually get more money staying at home than going on out and getting a minimum wage job. So Montana has decided to basically cancel unemployment benefits to encourage people to go on out and get those jobs. There was another story we had on whatreallyhappened.com today where trucking companies are offering huge salaries for professional qualified truck drivers because there is a shortage which is resulting in shortages of goods because the supply chain is still very weak following the COVID pandemic. Story out of the most important news.com saying that if we're experiencing severe shortages now when we are told the economy is doing well, how bad will things get when the economy starts tanking again? They're sounding the warning about, forget about the temporary shortage of toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and items. But they're talking about at some point down the road, you may be spending 40% of your income just to eat. Right now, there are shortages of computer chips, used cars and rental cars, gas, plastics and palm oil, truckers and rideshare drivers, homes and vacation houses, lumber, household products like toilet paper and tampons, furniture, chicken, bacon and hot dogs, imported foods like cheese, coffee, olive oil, chlorine, corn. That is quite a list of things that we're already seeing shortages of. So another story, this one again from Blacklisted News here, talking about how the price of corn has risen 142% in the last 12 months. And this is the article that says inflation could force U.S. households to spend 40% of their incomes on food. That's where we are headed with all of this. And there are warnings being sounded by industry leaders that food shortages could be the straw that breaks the camel's back and triggers a mass public uprising in this country. Down in Australia, their wine industry is being hit hard by the China sanctions. They're talking about this one winemaker, Jared White. He's built his business over a decade in China. He lived in Shanghai for several years, setting up a network of distributors to sell his wine to the booming Chinese market, which has a huge demand for foreign wines. But now, because of the sanctions, in a matter of months, it's falling apart and he may lose his business. Okay, let's talk now about immigration. And ready or not, thanks to Joe Biden, America the Weary will soon open its door to another 62,500 low-skilled foreigners from the third world. And the sovereign citizens in neighborhoods across our nation where these newcomers will be dumped will have no say in these decisions at all. Open borders judges made sure that the wants and needs of ordinary Americans are ignored. Our needs are being subordinated to those of the refugee resettlement racket. And there is no recourse under current U.S. law to reestablish local control of the process. I'm sure Tom in Florida is going to call in about that one here. Yeah, we're getting back to that whole idea of population replacement. Get rid of the smart thinking white people and replace them all with uneducated, low-skilled third worlders who will believe what they're told to believe and will do what they're told to do. Joe Biden has nominated David Chipman to be the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. He is being described as an enemy of the Second Amendment. Republicans are saying that his approval would jeopardize the constitutional rights of gun owners. And apparently he was an advisor at the Giffords Gun Control Group. And so he's been nominated to head the ATF. And he's definitely a gun grabber. Japan is concerned about their Olympics, and for a wide variety of reasons. There is a petition out to cancel the Olympics, and it has prompted Japan to extend the state of emergency that covers Tokyo, Osaka, Hyogo, and Kyoto. And the concerns of the officials, it's not there to suppress infections in the COVID vaccine. Now, the other reason the Olympics are in trouble is there is a female, well, not really, it's a transsexual. It's a man identifying as a female, is going to compete in the Olympics women's weightlifting competition. And the other women who are complaining about the transgender athlete say they're being told to stay quiet. So Laurel Hubbard is on track to become the first transgender athlete to compete at the Olympics after the International Weightlifting Federation modified qualifying requirements for the Tokyo Games on Wednesday. But Tracy Lambrex, who is also competing for New Zealand in weightlifting, has said she believes Hubbard competing in the sport is unfair to other women. And yes, of course, it is. It really is. It's an insult. Okay, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these people. Welcome back to our show here. Now, over in South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem has signed the 1776 pledge that bans anti-American indoctrination in schools. Specifically, they're talking about critical race theory. Over in Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton says parents should oppose critical race theory to save our kids. And the debate over this ideology is getting more and more intense. Interestingly enough, down in Florida, there is a teenager who is looking at 16 years in jail because she's been charged as an adult for hacking the Homecoming Queen contest with her mother, who's an assistant principal, and casting hundreds of fake votes to win Homecoming Queen. And she's been charged as an adult and is facing 16 years of jail. So finally, somebody somewhere is taking vote fraud seriously. It's amazing here. Over in Belgium, they had a massive distributed denial of service attack that took large sections of the entire country's internet offline. This started on the 4th of May, and it was just overwhelming the website with traffic, rendering their public-facing sites unusable. The attack targeted Belnet, which is the government-funded ISP provider for the country's educational institutions, research centers, scientific institutes, and government services, including ministries and the Belgian parliament. and just really paralyzed the whole thing. There is a new malware out there. There's always a new malware out there. This one is dubbed as Double Drag, Double Drop, and Double Back. And there's another unrelated one called Panda Stealer, which is a variant of a cryptocurrency stealer. These are planted mostly through global email spam. And they've hit some 50 organizations at the end of 2020, and they are growing out there. And again, this is such a threat to our economy and our cyber infrastructure. It is amazing that the government just seems to look the other way. Now, one of the areas of contention that we have seen is the argument between police and smartphone manufacturers over the existence of back doors to allow authorities into phones. And this was brought into focus during the San Bernardino attacker, when the FBI publicly requested Apple to help the investigators get past the passcode system of the iPhone. Apple refused, explaining that building a backdoor into the iPhone would eventually compromise all of its devices. Apple said it would only be a matter of time before the backdoor landed in the wrong hands, and they're absolutely correct about that. Police have now discovered that they can pair that phone with the owner's automobile and get into the phone that way quite easily. We're going to take a break for station identification. We're going to open the phone lines, 512-248-8252. Welcome back to our show here, and the phone lines are open. Area code 512-248-8252. This is a story that's actually, well, it was being covered on One American News Network, which is now my new favorite news network. It turns out that the biggest internet providers in the United States paid for a campaign to astroturf the debate regarding net neutrality. And nearly 18 million out of 22 million comments to the FCC were fabricated by this program. One 19-year-old submitted 7.7 million comments under fake, randomly generated names. But the astroturfing effort funded by the broadband industry stood out because it used real people's names without their consent, with third-party firms hired by the industry faking consent records. So it looks like cheaters do prosper, and if you don't believe me, just ask Joe Biden. Apple, as you know, issues mid-cycle iOS updates, and there are a lot of people who don't run those updates immediately, but Apple is saying you should run the new one as soon as you can. There apparently were some serious security flaws discovered, and so they've released iOS 14.5.1, and it's got a host of new features, including the company's new app tracking transparency framework, new Siri voices, those are fun, a whole bunch of new emojis, support for the AirTags, and more. And then the 14.5.1 update addressed a bug associated with the app tracking transparency feature. So always keep that stuff updated. Speaking of the AirTags, there's a story here from CNN, no less, where somebody tried to track their child with an Apple AirTag. Now, if you don't know what the AirTag is, it's a new device from Apple. It's this little round disc. It's metal and white plastic. It design-wise looks a lot like other Apple products. And it's a Bluetooth tracker that plugs into the Apple's Where Is It network. And if the AirTag is anywhere within range of any iPhone or any iPad, it will report its location back to your iPhone. And the story here is basically showing that this person was able to track their child with the AirTag to their school. And there were a couple of gaps in the coverage. But it's a little bit scary that somebody could throw one of these air tags in your purse or drop one in your jacket pocket and be able to follow you remotely. Getting into computer programming, amazingly enough, the oldest commercial programming language from the 1950s, called Fortran, is suddenly hot again. And users like NASA and the Department of Energy are using it on the world's most powerful supercomputers because there's a huge need for scientific number crunching, which is what Fortran was designed to do. Now, the Mars helicopter Ingenuity is taking its 5th flight today. May have already happened. We're going to get the data dump from it about 6 p.m. our time after the show is over. And instead of taking off, flying around, and coming back to its takeoff point, it's actually going to fly ahead because there's no flight deck per se on the Perseverance rover. So the Ingenuity has to leapfrog ahead. So they're going to set it down, way out ahead, where Perseverance is now going to follow along. So good luck to them. And finally, before we take phone calls here, I wanted to get this story out there. This is coming out of Daily Mail, and it's shown up in a couple of places. There is a scientist, Dr. Xinli Wei, from the Chinese Academy of Scientists, teamed with astrophysicist Dr. Rudolf Schild from Harvard Smithsonian and Dr. Ron Gabriel Joseph, say that they have found evidence of fungi on Mars. And they're saying they're looking at photos in the tracks of the Perseverance rover where these mushrooms, they're calling them, seem to shrink, appear, and disappear over a period of days. And this may be, again, another indicator of current life on Mars. And I've already sent this story over to Dr. Gilbert Levin, who is out there waiting for lichen to start forming on the camera lenses of Perseverance here. All right, we're going to take a phone call now. Norm in Huntington Beach, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you very much, Mike. Pleased to meet you. I'll get right down to it.
Okay.
I'm a mechanical engineer for over 35 years, retired aerospace, Boeing. Anyway, the Chalvin trial, when I took a look at it, nothing was presented by an engineer. It was just a bunch of doctors and training people. So I'd like to let you know that just after some simple analysis, when the policeman was down on his knees and his toes, that's only a fraction of his weight, his total body weight.
Yeah.
So when I took a look at estimating that, say he weighs 180 pounds, that's divided by 4. And then when his leg is on a 45-degree angle on his knee there and he's rocking onto his toes over that 9 minutes, 40 seconds or whatever it was, there's only the weight of a small toddler on the guy's back.
Yeah.
Estimated 10 to 13 pounds. No more at any one given time. So I think that some of these still pictures and some of the stuff that the prosecution presented when I was watching the trial was misleading to the jury. I didn't believe that scientifically, and every law of physics tells me, that only a fraction of that policeman's weight was on the man's back.
Well, it's kind of hard to guess just how much of his weight was there. He may have been favoring that knee, so to speak, to hold George Floyd down. But again, I think the issue is that the trial was simply unfair from the beginning. The publicity made it impossible to find an impartial jury. We know at least one of the jurors lied to get on the jury about their involvement with Black Lives Matter, and I think they should get a new trial. The bad news is that as of today, the federal government has filed new charges against Derek Chauvin. They want to make a sacrificial lamb out of him in the service to this whole idea of Black Lives Matter and critical race theory. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Again, the numbers are showing that violent crime is primarily black on black, and that more whites are killed by blacks than blacks are killed by whites. But the media is skewing this to push an agenda.
Yes, sir. I strongly believe all of that. And I emailed over a proof to that Eric Nelson. I know they can't reply. I hope he does well in his appeal.
Yeah.
And I just have to tell you that all the, looking at this as a PE and looking at this logically, he's not an engineer himself, so he really didn't have anyone testifying or really getting in depth of really what the pressure was on the back. I mean, right now, if you look at those still pictures and what the prosecution presented again, it's kind of misleading because the average person doesn't really know what the loads really are and what that static load was induced on his back. And it's just a fraction. It's the weight of a small toddler. It's just a fraction of that man's weight.
Mm-hmm. Well, even if it's a quarter of his weight, and we assume he weighs 180 pounds, that's still only 40 pounds.
Well, when his leg 45. Is on a 45-degree angle, it's less than that. It's about 1/3 of 40 pounds.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
It's kind of like a baseball catcher on all fours, and he rocks back on his toes. That's similar to that. But anyway, thank you very much, Mike. I know you're really busy. You're a great man, and you have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and we're going to go to Peter in Los Angeles. Hello, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I wanted to just briefly go over just how the totalitarian state has progressed here from fixing elections to banning people from social media and even the President of the United States to what they can do. I'm driving by right now, Mike, where the Rolling Stone reporter was caught back in 2012 and killed him on Highland Avenue. All the murders that they can do now by taking over the chips of the cruise control, just like they've done for years before that on automatic pilots and planes, to planning things like kiddie porn on a famous reporter who disputed that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And they planted kiddie porn on his hard drive to doxing, as you said, the tech companies just use all those fake things. I mean, Mike, it's everywhere.
Yes, it
really
is
everywhere. And the other thing that you said earlier, which was the drug cartels now making high-tech hits using drones on the police in Mexico.
Yes.
And I know we've talked about it before, how the CIA probably, almost certainly, used drones about 2 or 3 years ago to try to assassinate the president of Venezuela. You remember that?
Yes, I remember that. It wasn't very successful, though.
No, but it was a shot across the bow about what can be done. But what we're entering in now, Mike, it seems to me, is almost like back in the years in Europe of the 30 Years' War or the 100 Years' War, when the warlords took over Europe and the nation states were so weak they couldn't stand up to the warlords who had armies, personal armies, and they were rich and plundering everywhere, and everybody was trying to buy them off and so on. That seems to be where we're at right now, Mike, with this drone stuff, where now the nation state no longer has a monopoly on really big-time coercive, violent power, like using high-tech stuff to dox people or to murder them with drone swarms, which with somebody like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Sheldon Adelson when he was alive, have enough money to buy swarms and swarms of them.
Yes, they do.
And these guys who already own our government, right? They already own the legislatures and the states and the Congress and the president. Now they have all that at their beck and call too, and it's really a troubling but almost irreversible, I think, phenomena of where that's going.
Well, the technology is getting cheaper. It's becoming available. There are a lot of people doing good stuff with that new ability, and there are a lot of people doing bad stuff with it. Technology is neither good or bad. It's just people are good or bad.
Yeah, but before, how many people could afford a tank or a bomber? But now, these billionaires, some of these billionaires have as much money as countries.
Yes, they do.
And the drones, they are cheap, Mike. And by the way, the surveillance tech is cheap too for these guys, anyways. It's out of our reach, but they can have millions of drone swarms. How much does that cost? $10 billion. And how much does Bezos have? 250 billion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where we're heading. Not only do they own us, but and own our government that just is here, frankly, to exercise their will, the billionaires' will, and the people who can print money out of nothing, by the way, and never be audited, have more money than anybody. But
yes,
it's the degradation of the nation state and no longer having a monopoly on both spying or lethal force. Just food for thought.
Yeah.
And, it is what it is.
Well, I think somewhere in the future we're going to see our government. They're already starting to regulate drones. The FAA is requiring a registration of drones above a certain size. And, I think at some point we'll probably see them getting banned to ordinary citizens for precisely that reason.
If you look at some of the tech sites, some of the drones are already in use at squad level in the Army and the Marine Corps. They're big enough to fit the palm of your hand or smaller.
Yeah.
And they can be lethal. And so the size thing, I don't know what that really means, really. But, I'm not sure how you regulate that. It has to be regulated, but they own the regulations anyways. Just like they regulated, the SEC is supposed to regulate Bernie Madoff and the stock market. And just like they were supposed to regulate the mine safety in the West Virginia or the Deepwater Horizon. What's regulation to these guys? It's nothing.
No, regulation is just for us small people.
That's right. So they'll have all that stuff, and we'll be totally surveilled and can be knocked off. Not be able to even enter our own bank accounts, and they'll be able to kill us at will.
Yeah, may well be.
That's it for me, Mike. Happy Mother's Day, and have a good weekend.
All right, thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Ken in Illinois. Hello, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Michael. I just wanted to thank you and Claire for your ongoing effort and sacrifice. You two do an amazing job.
Thank you.
Shout out to Tom in Florida. You're very welcome. Tom in Florida and the AK-47, as Miles calls him. If he's the AK-47, then Marco's the AH-64 Apache. And I'd love to do a show with them two guys, the three of us talking. Awesome callers. All your callers are great. Layla in Canada, she made such a great point on Tuesday that
yes,
Canadians better watch out, because when the United States falls, when our democracy falls, when our democratic republic, rather, falls, Canada's next.
Yes.
Canada's next. Where the United States goes, so goes the world. Third world nations, they should care about the West, because where the United States goes, if the U.S. falls, it's chaos. It's total destabilization. And just saying that this is incompetence from this bureau and from the feds and from everyone else, incompetence doesn't even begin to do this justice.
No, there's an agenda out there, and I think it's coming down from the globalists that, they have to destroy this country before it can be absorbed into the new global government.
That's right. That's absolutely right, Michael. The last front that will stand and put up a fight for the things that we were founded on, for our principles, for our ethics, for all of our freedoms, for the free markets, which yielded the biggest middle class the world had ever seen. This is all premeditated destabilization, and I think you're right. I think it's angling for technocratic global control, which for my entire life was conspiracy theory, right?
Yes, and now it's happening.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So at least for 20 years.
Ken, I got to put you on hold. Don't hang up. I'm going to bring you right back after these words from our sponsors. Welcome back to our show here. And again, a friendly reminder that Republic Broadcasting Network needs your continuing support to do what they are doing. The postal address where you can send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can make a credit or debit card donation is 800-724-2719, extension 3. Now, if you mail in a donation of $100, you will get your choice of an official RBN coffee mug or an official RBN t-shirt. And so you need to include a return address. And if you want the t-shirt, we need your t-shirt size. And I understand we're almost out of those. So if you want that t-shirt, you got to move quickly on that one. If you send in $115 or more, you will get both items. And don't forget that front sight firearms deal, because that is still going on as well. All right, we're talking with Ken in Illinois. We're talking about the globalists. We're talking about how they need to basically bring down the United States before it can be merged with the new global government. And rather than being the last bulwark, I think the United States is kind of the last holdout, because if you look at a lot of the nations in Europe, they're far more deteriorated with wokeness and political correctness than even the United States right now. And it's almost like the United States is behind the timeline for the New World Order.
You said it, Mike. You said it. More wokeness, more political correctness, and those who aren't woke and hyper politically correct, they're still trying to recover from Soviet rule. And that's what we're looking at again. We're looking at some kind of technocratic globalist communism. There's no way around it. So, Tom, sometimes from Florida, my man, Tom, he gets slammed sometimes for being repetitive on immigration. But if you're talking about immigration or economics and immigration, what's the difference? It's hand in glove for destabilization.
Yes.
Right? The Fed coin, right? Whatever cryptocurrency the Feds come out with universal basic income, it's got to be spent in a month, whatever. This is a central planned economy, and that does not go well.
No, it didn't work in the old Soviet Union either.
No, that's right. That's right. Where has it? Give it 25 years and watch the place watch the empire just deteriorate.
Yes.
And this is the last stand. Let me just finish with a shout out again to Mark from North Carolina, Mitchell from, I believe, Memphis, Peter and Don. I've been listening for a couple months. Your callers, yourself, Claire, help keep me sane. They want us to think that we are alone in this fight. And you guys show that we absolutely are not. This is the last stand. We're fighting for Western civilization. Let me have some other fighters talk to you, Mike. I'll let you go. I'll call in again soon. Congrats to all you Paul Reveres. We need you.
All right. Well, thank you very much here. And we're almost at another commercial break, so I'm going to wait before I take another call. We do have lines open. area code 512-248-8252. And I want to put out a call to Rivero's Rangers. Obviously, right now, I am in need of a new video streaming platform, hopefully inexpensive, if not free, and easy to use. And so if you're aware of such a platform, drop me an email at the What Really Happened email address, and that would be a tremendous, tremendous blessing. Getting back to a little bit of news here before the commercial break. You remember the Arecibo radio telescope built in the valley and the much larger version built by China called the FAST telescope. NASA is saying the idea would probably work using a giant crater on the moon. And the Jet Propulsion Laboratory announced they're receiving a $500,000 grant to develop the idea through the Innovative Advanced Concepts Program. So that is a really, really good idea. Now, the Lunar Crater Radio Telescope is not an official NASA mission yet. They don't have the funding for it, but I think it would be a really, really good idea, especially if it's done on the far side of the moon to block out radio interference from here on Earth, which can be considerable at times. Okay, and let's see one more story. There is a paper that's been presented by Planetary Science Institute researcher scientist David Horvath, who says that some of the volcanoes on the planet Mars show signs of recent activity. Recent, of course, in geological terms, like 50,000 years ago. But it says this increases the possibility of recent habitable conditions. Now, life can be very adaptive. We have the extremophiles right here on planet Earth, living in the deep crust temperature zones and underneath the ice floes in the Arctic. So any life that was on Mars would have adapted to changing environment. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these few words. Welcome back to our show here, and we have phone lines open right now, area code 512-248-8252, and we're going to go to Layla in Canada. Hello, Layla. Excuse me. Hello, Layla. Welcome to the show. Okay? What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. First of all, I'm very concerned about you being banned again from YouTube.
Yeah, me too.
And I noticed you're not even on BitChute. So this morning I made a donation of $500 USD, which of course means more in Canadian currency. So far this year I've donated $1,250 USD. I am not a rich woman. The only reason I'm doing it is because I think RBN and you in particular, Mike Rivero, are so essential to our freedom to speak, if not to actually plan how we're going to resolve this issue and take back our freedoms and our natural rights. When Thomas Jefferson said that there are certain rights that are self-evident, he meant that they were natural rights. They were not necessarily even awarded or given by any supreme power. The supreme power created us with the right to exercise our individuality and our self-will, our self-determination, the right to be ourselves, as long as we do not hurt and harm others. And that's the problem. We have a malignant force that is it's an oligarchy, a global oligarchy, and I attribute them to being centered in the cities of London, Tel Aviv, Washington, D.C., as well as the Vatican. I consider all of those to be part of this, and all the other clubs that they have formed. Of the elite, they're like the times of the barons and the superior knights who rampaged and tormented and starved the people while they went off on their so-called campaigns. But anyway, the thing that really gets me is I wish people would stop calling it a vaccine. It's a pseudo-vaccine, or it's not even a gene therapy. It's a gene derangement, because we don't yet know, and I don't mean derangement in the negative sense. Who knows? Maybe it is therapeutic, but we do not know yet if it is therapeutic. So it's basically a gene derangement, a gene experiment. It's not a vaccine. It might be a pseudo-vaccine. Secondly, this whole concept of white and black races, it's as though there's more than, among the whites, there's more than one race. The human beings are a species of the primates. The primates are within the animal kingdom. We're one of the more advanced primates. Within those primates is the humanoid species, the negroid, the mongoloid, and then the combinations all in between. There is no such thing as the simplicity. That's how shallow they've made it. It's not white on black. Just look alone at the history of England. Wales is made up of the original Britons because they kept moving west as all of the invaders came in. All of the invaders were white. There were first the Angles, then there were the Jutes, and then there were the Vikings, and then the Saxons. I mean, there's just such a mixture. They were all white. And King Alfred, Ethelred's youngest son, there were 7 kingdoms in England. That is how much the whites discriminated against one another. Yes. Because of their culture, their religious beliefs, their practices, their appearance, their methods of dress. So discrimination is almost a survival instinct. When you see someone that is different, you wonder, are they trying to dispossess me or kill me? That is a natural impulse. Otherwise, we would never have gotten to the point that we are today. We would have died long ago if we immediately just lay down our arms and or opened them wide and embraced everybody and said, hey, hi, welcome. What would you like to take from me today? Or what can I do for you? I mean, it's ridiculous to allow it to have gone this far where everybody is talking about white on black. Look at the black killing on blacks. I mean, and I don't mean to suggest in any way that blacks are in any way intellectually inferior. I believe that brains, it's called epigenetics. Never mind what the genetics that we are born with that program our intelligence and our behavior. But that is developed as a child in response to the complexity of language and the complexity of the culture around us. And that hardwiring is an interaction with the environment. That is, put it simply, nature with a combination of nurture. So the blacks simply are wired differently when they are raised in a different culture. The American blacks, those who have been here long enough, are very similar. As my son says, they're just like us, except their skin is darker in various shades. However, as a youngster, when I was a teenager, it was a ritual that everybody went through. When you had the chance, you went backpacking because you wanted to explore different cultures, different languages in their natural environment where you got the legitimate culture. And that was the beauty of this planet, its diversity. If you're religious, then God created us to be diverse. And I think I've taken up more time. I was going to set my stopwatch. I think I don't want to hog the time as I did yesterday. I apologize. I went too long. But I want to urge everybody, please, Mike Rivero Show is one of the few that allows us to actually interact with one another. It gives us a great deal of comfort to know there are others like us and to hear other people's opinions. So maybe we can moderate our own opinions or be more affirmed in our own opinions. Mike Rivero Show is truly unique. I mean, I scoured them all while I was in grief over that child's death that I mentioned, and I was also sulking because I didn't like the way I was talked about. But you know, you got to develop thick skin, and but while I was, not calling into Mike's show, I watched all the others. InfoWars is great, except it's a one-way thing. It's directed at us. We can't interact with each other. And that's where, Mike, you are absolutely precious and unique in that we can interact, and you're so tolerant. So thank you very much. And I urge all of you, if you can afford it, please contribute to RBN, help Mike and RBN stay on the air, and find a method of continuing to allow us to reach out to one another. So that's it for today. Bye.
All right. Well, Layla, thank you for the phone call, and have yourself a really good weekend. And we're going to switch over to Steve in West Virginia. Hello, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What's going on, Mike? Hey, listen, I just want to put out some information. First of all, the VA is cold calling people to come in for the vaccine with no appointment. So that tells you how desperate they are. And also, I've had one veteran also tell me that they're going to put a program together where they're going to start paying veterans to take the vaccine. So that tells you, which I believe they are vastly underperforming what they thought they could do as far as getting people vaccinated.
Yes.
And one of the key mistakes they've made so far is putting Bill Gates as the father of the vaccines. Because I think he's deterred a lot of people from getting the vaccines with all his nutty ideas about blocking the sun and sending out these GMO mosquitoes and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think people think he's a nut. And I'll further say that I think if he took every penny of his net worth and tried to reform his image, he still couldn't run for president and win. That's how bad he's disliked. So I mean, I don't think the guy has a chance.
Yeah, I don't think he does either. And, his divorce and all that's coming out surrounding the divorce, his relationship with Jeff Epstein and everything, I think that's going to damage any possibility he has of running for any political office.
Yeah. Mike, what do you believe the timing of that divorce is extremely odd. What do you believe truly behind it?
Well, the story I'm hearing is that Bill and Melinda Gates had decided they were going to divorce actually a couple of months ago, and they were looking for a time to make that public that was going to generate the least amount of backlash. Melinda Gates apparently rented an entire island for the family to hide out on so they wouldn't be harassed by the media when the announcement came out. Bill Gates was not invited to join them on the island. And I think they just waited for a time when the news was tied up with a bunch of other stuff to make the announcement.
But do you think that she has a conscience, maybe, and maybe after all these nutty ideas, in the eugenics and all that stuff,
I'm more inclined to think it had something to do with the fact that. Again, it's being reported that Bill Gates had maintained an ongoing affair with a prior girlfriend, and I think Melinda just got fed up with that.
Yeah. Okay, one last thing, and then I'm gone.
Yeah.
Do you believe the vaccine? I mean, the vaccine is definitely a population control mechanism. Don't you believe that?
I don't know exactly what its purpose is. I doubt it has anything to do with COVID. I'm already having vaccine regret, but there's nothing I can do about that now. And I know there's a lot of money on the line, and that's why corporations are uniting in locked goose step to try and get everybody to get a vaccine because there's a huge amount of money that's being made off of this.
Mike, do you think they're going to stop people from traveling internationally if they don't have this vaccine?
Well, they already have from time to time. And, at some point, I think we're going to reach the point where you're not going to be able to get a job without a vaccine certificate, and you're not going to get on a commercial jet without a vaccine card. And, it's just a new form of control over the population, and it's medical tyranny is what it is, because I would consider it to be an inalienable right to decide what and where you get treated medically for, because there have been so many horrendous mistakes in the past, like the 1976 swine flu vaccine, thalidomide, a bunch of others as well. And so far, it's not looking like the COVID vaccines are really doing all that well. There are adverse reactions. Right now, it looks like you have a greater chance of dying from the COVID vaccine than you do from COVID itself. And finally, it is a completely experimental technology that has never been tried before. I saw this cartoon the other day of two rats in a cage, and one says, "Are you going to get your COVID shot?" And the other one says, "No, they haven't finished the human trials yet."
Yeah. You don't think so? You don't think the people are going to win then? you think these guys are going to beat us then?
I know they're going to push as hard as they can. They want to control every aspect of our lives. I mean, that's part of the liberal agenda, to control every aspect of our lives. It's the foundation of the liberal movement, and it goes all the way back to Margaret Mead's Coming of Age in Samoa, which was a literary fraud. But it created this whole idea that if you completely control the environment, you can make the people inside it extraordinarily happy. I disagree. I think despite careful controlling of environment and food and temperature and whatever, people are still going to do whatever the heck they want to do.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I wouldn't, even if the VA comes out with some kind of program, I wouldn't take that vaccine even if they offered me $100,000. So, Mike, I'll let you go and have a good weekend.
All right, same to you here. And we do have open phone lines right now, area code 512-248-8252. And we're going to go to Al in Canada. Hello, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I sent you another link to Shadow Stats again.
I saw it
before, but I found... You see that M1 money supply there?
Yeah.
At 70% year over year? That's a real hockey stick.
Yes, it is.
That is very scary. And apparently, just like in Canada, the United States, the economy is faltering, even though they created this ton of cash out of nothing.
Yes.
Just started throwing it around. When are they going to learn? Well, I mean, maybe they're doing this on purpose. Do you actually think they're trying to crash nations' currencies to get us to, embrace each other and sit around the big UN campfire singing Kumbaya?
Well, there has already been talk of a global currency called the Globo, and in order to get people to accept it, they're going to have to be, they're going to have to lose trust in their own national currency, and that's already happening here with the dollar. I mean, Russia has turned away from the dollar and gone with the euro. The dollar is losing its reserve status around the world, and left to its own devices, it's not going to do well. I mean, when the Bank of England lost its reserve status following the Bretton Woods conference, the bank got into trouble and it had to be nationalized.
Well, yeah, because in the end, they've got nothing to back up.
Yeah.
What they have no reserves. There's nothing to back any of that currency up. Another thing too is the fact that what they're creating this cash and what they're spending it on, there's nothing of value there.
No.
You know what I mean? There's no value.
No, it's being spent on areas that will not generate a return.
Yeah. I mean, infrastructure, you can't, the over-financialization of everything, everywhere, has just gotten to the point where it's an inevitable crash, because the pyramid is I mean, first of all, it is a pyramid.
Yes.
But it's absolutely ridiculous now. The pyramid has inverted on itself. So it's kind of looking like a diamond. And it doesn't matter how much more currency they create. All they're doing is just devaluing, and it's a race to the bottom with all currencies across the globe.
Yes.
Right now, the Canadian dollar is at 82.5 cents U.S., and 2 weeks ago it was at like 78. That is really quick. And they want to create another $4 trillion.
We're coming up on a time when the Canadian dollar is going to be worth more than the U.S. dollar.
Well, it wasn't that many years ago when it was about equal. It was great. I was buying stuff from the United States hand over fist. It was a beautiful thing.
Okay, Al, I got to put you on hold. Don't hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Al in Canada. We're talking about how the U.S. dollar is being debased by all this instant money creation, and we're all paying the price for it because inflation is starting to hit, and it's driving up gasoline prices, it's driving up food prices, and it's not really free money because one way or the other, we all pay for that.
Oh yeah, the purchasing power just, it just nosedives. And
yes.
Over the commercial there, is something hit me. It's like this big race, right? And,
yes.
For a long time, Japan and Zimbabwe and other countries were in the lead, right? So Zimbabwe's gone, right? They've hyperinflated their currency, but Japan is still there, and they're looking back, and they're looking at the rest of us, going, "I knew you guys would catch up."
Yeah.
Ever since their '80s crash with their their inflated real estate market, they've been debasing their currency for decades.
Yes.
That's what happens. And unfortunately for them, they don't have any really natural resources, so everything they manufacture, they need those resources to be imported.
Yes.
So they kind of have an excuse because they are highly educated and they're very healthy people, considering that those nuclear problems they got going on over there. But anyway, that's all I had to say, Mike. Once again, like you said, nothing's free. There is no free ride. I don't care who you are. And if you're poor, it's going to hit you harder and you're going to suffer more. Thanks a lot for your time, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're coming up on the end of the show, so I'm going to get a little bit more news here. We're all familiar with Star Trek, The Next Generation, and the holodeck. And it turns out there are people working trying to make that a reality. Back in 2018, researchers at Brigham Young University demonstrated a device called an optical trap display that used lasers to create free floating holographic images that don't need a screen. And that same team is now demonstrating a new technique that allows those holographic images to be animated. And that is going to be an exciting new technology that will be coming to entertainment and to computers as well. Okay. Finally, NASA scientists have been running simulations as to what would happen if a giant asteroid was heading for Earth, and was kind of interesting because the movie Deep Impact was playing on TV just a little while ago here. But following the simulations, NASA is saying that even a nuclear bomb would not stop a giant asteroid heading for Earth. And they did this massive 6-month simulation, and it ended in a devastating impact that destroyed a huge, huge chunk of planet Earth. So hopefully we're not going to have any impacts like that. But the reality is, for all the money they're spending spotting these asteroid bodies, they really don't have a technology to deal with something that is on a collision impact with the Earth. There's the music. Time for me to get the heck out of here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please spread the word of Republic Broadcasting. Spread the word of WhatReallyHappened.com. Again, I'm sorry, my YouTube channel has been cut off for 2 weeks. I'm looking for a replacement right now, and we'll be back on Monday. Have a great weekend, and aloha, America.